So James, we have done a few of these performance and expenditure reviews. If you look back at it, what are the take homes and what are the things that you think we need to improve on, and how did it help you?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, Ulrike. Thank you. We are part of some of the first PERs, Performance and Expenditure Reviews. Actually, at that stage, they were called EPRs, Expenditure and Performance Reviews. And the methodology had been developed, and we were following quite the personnel undertaking the PER were following quite a rigorous methodology. And at that stage, some of the first ones we dealt with was on housing. And what was quite interesting with the housing one was that I think in my mind, I thought that we were undertaking a historic review of what has been spent versus what have been the outputs and outcomes. And then there was supposed to be a model that would say, is the program is it affordable, for example? But a lot more came out of the PER than what I expected. It opened up a lot of doors to say, looking back actually at the housing policy, for example, that was it still relevant or wasn't it still relevant? Should we still be continuing with it? Are we looking at it from the right point of view? Is the data there to do the work? Is the data credible? Is the data standardized across provinces and national departments? Are we able to take the data, manipulate it, and then cost it going forward? And again, are we looking at it from the correct focus when looking at the policy? So, for example, in the housing PER, there's a particular focus on the one housing PER on RDP housing, for example, where the original policy intent actually wasn't being implemented by provinces. And anyway, so that led to the PER brought back modeled a projection forward of what is the program sustainable, but also showed us what outputs were delivered with the money that we'd spent in the past, and that gave us a door to look at various other avenues, such as the economic classification of expenditure, such as is the policy still relevant. But I'd like to ask you, Ulrike, maybe just throw it back at you, because you've also been involved in many PERs. Do you think that the PER methodology is correct and still relevant, and how could it possibly be improved?
What the log frame does, and I think this is the value in the work that we do, and it's not just in the kind of PERs, but in how we design programs, in how we, so both from a kind of a service delivery program and program budgets or budget programs, that would allow us to effectively measure performance, to cost those activities around all of that. So the methodology was useful. After doing a course, I don't know when was that, in 2007, 2008 on this, and then seeing it a few years later actually being applied to something has reshaped how I think about how budgets are designed, how programs are designed, how we measure performance, and how we get the value add and how we measure that value add that justifies how the fiscus allocates its resources. What it's also done, I think the PERs has helped us rethink some of our mechanisms that we think about around subsidization, around program allocations, and effectiveness. I think that there was a big issue around just rethinking equity in how we allocate resources. It's also helped us also think about, and this is specifically in the public transport one, about what kind of reforms is necessary. It's made us reconceptualize public transport within a broader land use policy framework, because that's the one thing that came out of that PER that was quite clear, is that the relationship between public transport operations and spatial planning and land use is probably the most important determinant around what makes public transport affordable or not. So yes, it's then also, I suppose, expanded my interest in broader urban development issues. So after doing that first human settlements PER that looked at, and it was very specific programs. Remember, it was
IRDP.
So it was the project linked subsidy and the IRGP, which was basically the same thing. The one that we couldn't get any data on was OPSCAP in that. I remember that quite clearly. CREW and all of those. So in thinking about housing, and then, at the same time, also then getting involved with the public transport one it changes your perspective, and I suppose that is what really got me interested in thinking about kind of urban economics, urban financing, and what is that and what it means. So now, if you had to think about bringing other aspects of this into water and electrification, climate change and climate resilience, so that was quite useful in looking at it like that. There's still some scope to do a whole lot more, given how our programs are designed.
What was also useful about the PER methodology was, for example, the theory of change, as you've the whole log frame. And what we discovered through this process was that there was a giant leap between inputs, activities, and outputs, and the expected outcomes and impacts that a policy is trying to achieve. And I think that is a big area in government, maybe in government in across the world, I think, is that we battle to say that this is what the program intends, this is what the money will buy, and will we achieve those expected outcomes and outputs from those expected outcomes and impacts from these outputs that we're trying to do, because effectively the outcomes aren't in our control. And that made us really helped us to really think through new policies that departments and government is trying to design. Another thing that was quite interesting to me was that the PER would probably be looking at one aspect and going down a certain route, but as I mentioned earlier, it opened up so many doors because of the things that were being brought out of it. I think that there's a role to play for PERs, and maybe it's explicit, but or maybe it's implied. But I think in terms of value for money, and as you alluded to earlier, was allocative efficiency. Are we getting the desired outcomes, outputs and outcomes from the amounts of money that we are putting in? Perhaps that's something to look at in terms of, and I think it has been done in terms of education and health, and we can see, South Africa relative to other countries, but also in other social programs. Are we really getting the value for money that we hope we are getting? So I think that must be a stronger focus as well going forward.
It also actually makes us think about how we analyze policies. I mean, if on the top of my head, if you take something like the Comprehensive Plan for Sustainable Human Settlements, so if you take the document itself, it's quite easy to define what kind of impacts they're trying to achieve, what the objectives are, but when you go further down the log frame into what are the outputs, what are the activities, and what are the inputs, it falls apart.
Exactly.
So I think it also helps us as budget analysts think about how we analyze policies and what kind of policy advice and policy support we give to departments around this, so that they understand what it takes and what kind of resources it will take to achieve some objective in the long term.
That's right.
If we had an opportunity to do a new set of PERs, what would we do? At least in our space, in the built environment. I mean, so if you remember, we did a set in human settlements, social housing. We did that.
Rapid appraisal.
That rapid appraisal of informal settlements, which wasn't really a PER. It was really just a kind of
quick and dirty.
A quick and dirty evaluation of, or trying to verify if what we were reporting to cabinet was actually being delivered. That was a funny one, but then, I mean, so I don't know, in human settlements, if we had to do more, what would we do? I mean, I think affordable housing finance is probably a big one.
I think it should really be helping us with prioritizing programs and reprioritizing funding. I think that should be a key outcome of PERs. Goes to cabinet, goes to parliament, whatever. And even during budget processes, they should be elevated. And I think we tried to do that a bit in the past, but it hasn't really achieved that yet. And I think the PRs, as they gain more and more momentum, need to be elevated to that point.
There's still lots of work that we can do around using this methodology in assessing a whole bunch of programs that we have, be it on roads infrastructure. The one on public transport was quite useful in kickstarting the reforms that we have made in the public transport network grant. Okay, thank you, James, I think you've given the team a lot to think about and plotting a way forward and setting the agenda for a new phase around expenditure reviews.
Thank you, Ulrike. It's been a pleasure, and I think it's given me a lot to think about as well, and I'm sure you as well.
Yeah.